CTV has failed me as a Palestinian employee and continues to fail the Palestinian community as a whole.
Palestinian-Canadian journalist Yara Jamal is speaking up after she was fired from CTV News in the Atlantic region for her views on Israel. So I'm going to play for you her video here, and I'm also going to get to a report from The Breach, which is a great Canadian outlet, and I'll get to a couple of their pieces where they have discussed and they've analyzed a lot of the bias in Canadian media coverage when it comes to this conflict. So let's first get to her video here. This was posted to TikTok.
CTV News fired me after speaking up for Palestine. And as disappointed as I am, I'm not shocked. I was the only Palestinian person in the media in the Atlantic region and the only Middle Eastern woman in their newsroom. My existence should have been important during a time of genocide against my own people. But instead they decided to fire me, which is extremely painful. There was absolutely no regard that I'm witnessing my own people getting killed. Absolutely nothing. Here's a rundown of what happened. I made a comment during an interview where I was asked if Jews can exist in a free Palestine, to which I had replied saying, Jews can exist, the Zionist ideology cannot. The state of Israel cannot. Logically, a free Palestine cannot exist with an occupation or with a state that was labeled an apartheid state by human rights organizations. My firing took less than 24 hours after a Twitter thread had started labeling me anti-Semitic. When asked why I was fired, I was told that I broke the collective agreement, but both Bell and CTV would not specify as to what I exactly violated me.
All right, before I continue her video here, this is one of the most pervasive, this issue, this idea that being critical of a government makes you anti-Semitic is completely insane. It should be insane to anybody. Just it shouldn't involve any analysis. Of course, you can criticize a government regardless of what the government is. Here, Jamal is discussing the obvious. You cannot have an apartheid state. You cannot have Israel as it currently exists and expect to have a free Palestine. So it sounds like what Yara Jamal is asking for here is a democratic state where Jewish people and Muslims or Israelis and Palestinians can live together in one state. And the reason why that is becoming more, and I should maybe bring it up. There's a great talk between somebody who used to be in the IDF and a Palestinian who used to live in Gaza. And they're both older now, and that era of their life is kind of behind them. But they've both come to the same conclusion that the only real solution here is one free state where Israelis and Palestinians are living together. And a big reason for that is because of the ongoing encroachment on Palestinian land with these Israeli settlements. And because of that, you have the separation. I mean, by land, Gaza is separated from the West Bank. So if there is two states, yet there's no land connecting those two states, how is that going to work, just operationally? Let alone, of course, with these ongoing settlements, are you now going to take back that land from Israelis? Because that seems unlikely. So doesn't it make just more sense to allow Palestinians and Israelis to live on all the land altogether? I mean, that's what Canada, the US, Europe, you have all different ethnicities, religions, whatever, living within the same region. So to try and have this ethno-state or two different ethno-states doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And as we can see over the past decades, it is not safe for either Israelis or Palestinians living in that kind of condition.
This infuriates me as to the fact that during my time at CTV, I had many reports to HR about anti-Palestinian racism. And I had explicitly told my managers many times on different occasions that, hey, your newsroom is extremely uncomfortable for me, and my existence is nothing but a box to be checked. I am consistently uncomfortable working with certain individuals who consistently made me feel uncomfortable as a person of color. Nothing was done, and I did not matter for CTV, as expected. I was also one of, about 4 people of color in the entire company, so I should not be surprised either. Both Bell and CTV had told me that I needed to be impartial about the genocide in Gaza. Impartial about a genocide? Impartial about kids being slaughtered or hospitals being bombed?
All right, so this is the other thing that really infuriates me about how news tends to operate, and it's not just this issue; it's every issue practically, where they feel this need to force both sides. Oh, one side says this, one side says this, when there is objective facts and objective reality. And if you're wondering, okay, but objective reality to one person, like one person may value something differently than somebody else values something. The news should focus on, I would hope, human rights. That should be where they base their if there's any perspective, where that perspective is based on. That perspective should be based on human rights. What is best for the most amount of people? When you have a government backed by Canada, backed by the US, backed by Europe, when you have the Israeli government indiscriminately bombing Gaza for almost 2 months now, killing 14,000 civilians, mostly women and children. On the other side of that so-called war, it's not a war because one side doesn't have an army, but let's, for the sake of this argument, the other side of that war, this had their attack on October 7th, killed over 1,000 people, and there's been none since then. The other side has killed 14,000. Let's take the labels off it and forget who did what. You look at those two things and you think, hey, one side is clearly doing a lot more damage here. There should be some calls for restraint. They haven't stopped their bombing since the 7th. One side has stopped. The other side has not stopped killing people since the 7th. Maybe there should be some restraint here. Maybe a ceasefire. Maybe let's end this completely, so there is no killing on either side. But no, that wouldn't be impartial. That wouldn't be fair, because you are calling on one side that is doing most of the damage right now to end what they are doing, let alone the context of the apartheid state, of the blockade, of this ongoing occupation, the fact that there are 2 sets of rights for Palestinians and Israelis. Like, all of this is so incredibly frustrating when you just look at the basic facts. And you can do that by looking at what human rights organizations that also call out, Russia, China, the US, every country that commits human rights violations. When you look at Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN, it's very clear there is no ulterior motive here. There is no other reason for criticizing Israel. They were just looking at the sheer facts, the sheer numbers, the amount of civilians being killed and injured, and are saying, hey, this needs to stop. If there's any anchor point for a place like CTV News, it should be what human rights organizations are collectively saying, including Israel-based human rights organizations like B'Tselem, what they are saying. To side with a government over the UN, over human rights organizations, is insane. But that's what CTV News did here. So there's a little bit more. Let me just play, since she has a final message here for CTV News.
Freedom of speech does not exist for people like me or people of color. It doesn't. Palestinians continue to be silenced, and I will not stand for it anymore. CTV has failed me as a Palestinian employee and continues to fail the Palestinian community as a whole. That's it.
And it's impossible to argue with her. She's exactly right. Based on what we're seeing, based on the reporting I'll get to here shortly from the breach about CTV and their bias. And I'm also going to end on later the clip I was referencing earlier about a Palestinian author who was expelled in the Nakba and a historian who served in the IDF, and how they both came to the same conclusion of a one-state solution. It's a very interesting clip. I think it's worth watching. But briefly here, let's get to just some of what CTV's been up to. So the breach is again a great Canadian outlet. Writing here, CTV forbids use of Palestine, suppresses critical stories about Israel. The media conglomerate that runs CTV, CP24, and BNN Bloomberg is distorting the truth about Israel's violence in Gaza, its own journalists say. So they talked to several journalists at CTV who, for obvious reasons, want to remain nameless. But it goes to showing as well that there are people working at these stations at CTV that want to do proper objective reporting on this, but they're being held back by what they're allowed to say. So they go on to write here, the journalists said senior producers and senior editors across the platforms of CTV's parent company, Bell Media, have disparaged Palestinian guests, told employees that protests calling for a ceasefire should not be reported on, and blocked or delayed stories that included too much contextual information about Israel's military occupation and regime of apartheid in Palestine. Isn't that amazing? You gave two... I have to laugh because it's so ridiculous. A news organization saying you're giving them too much information. Oh, we can't. Don't give the context of the of two different sets of rights for Palestinians and Israelis. That's informing people too much. It's telling people too much about how much control the Israeli government has over the lives of Palestinians. Like they're actively telling you, misinform the audience, because we want you to hold back information that would give the audience more awareness about what is really going on. Going on to right here, the journalists who are not being identified for fear of retribution described a widespread bias at the media conglomerate against Palestinians that's resulted in one-sided, incomplete coverage of the violence in Gaza that does a huge disservice to Canadians. So, just in case you didn't know, Bell Media, who I also used to work for years and years ago, not the Atlantic channel here, but they write, Bell Media is the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that operates CTV News Channel, CTV's national broadcast and national websites, local CTV affiliate stations, BNN, Bloomberg, and CP24 in Toronto. These revelations follow the breach's analysis that found coverage on CTV National News has featured far more Israeli than Palestinian voices. So I'm going to link to both their articles below, which are both fantastic. This is the other one that I want to reference here because it's really worth understanding how widespread this is. CTV National News has featured 62% more Israeli than Palestinian voices, aired racist stereotypes about Arabs, and allowed Israeli military officials to make false claims without pushback in its month of coverage since October 7th. A comprehensive analysis is found. The broadcast, which is the most watched national news show in Canada, even failed to identify 41% of its Palestinian speakers by name, while identifying the vast majority of Israeli speakers with their names, as well as family relationships and personal connections to violence they've experienced. Also going to the level of dehumanization that Palestinians are often facing in reporting about this conflict. The fact that they're not even being named and their family connections not even being discussed when bringing them on. Now, multiple journalists who spoke to the breach said there are plenty of employees who want to do, as I was saying earlier, they want to do good work about Gaza, but they're afraid of repercussions. They said that editors and producers have said they're scared of the backlash from higher-ups, and if their work draws criticism from right-wing pro-Israel groups like Honest Reporting Canada, which we'll get to in just a second here. What an amazing name for a right-wing group. Honest Reporting Canada. We're very fair. They said, well, both sides reach out and criticize our coverage. Like, yes, but there's one side you actually listen to, which goes to, again, this right-wing company here, Honest Reporting Canada. They're part of the reason that Yara Jamal got fired from CTV News. They're the ones that helped to lift this story up. Honest Reporting Canada cited an article covering the anti-Israeli demonstration that Yara Jamal was at. So this is like, and again, twisting it to act like, oh, she wants to commit genocide against the other side. That's not, which is not at all what she's arguing. She's arguing for a one-state solution where everyone lives together in a democratic state. But again, the way they twist that perspective and make it something it's not is just completely disgusting. But this is what we're talking about. Like, so they'll listen to these far right outlets and the pressure they put on these stations, but they won't listen to the side with the actual facts and data and that are based in human rights, that are listening to human rights organizations and the United Nations. Last thing here. This is a great listen. It's a couple minutes here. This is a Palestinian author who was expelled in the Nakba and a historian who served in the IDF. So Jewish professor Avi Shlaim meets Palestinian author Ghada Karmi.
What are your views about a solution?
Yeah, very good question, and one that everybody should be asking now. My starting point for that is that, very simply, I want to go home. Very simply. Not only me, but millions of other Palestinians. 5 to 6 million of them are living in camps, and others are living in exile. We want to go home. Now, the question then is, how do you accommodate that, which is a fundamental and basic demand, which must be met? The answer seems to me to be clear. We have to share it. We have to find a way of sharing the same land. Let us live together. And the only way we can do that is in a democracy. We have to have a state which is democratic, unlike the current state of Israel, which is democratic and gives all its citizens equal rights. That's the answer, in my view. Humane, just, and the only possible one, frankly.
Most interesting. And you and I have moved along parallel trajectories and reached the same conclusion. One democratic state is the solution. But I did not reach this conclusion in the distant past, but in the last few years, because for many years I was a supporter of the two-state solution. But Israel has destroyed the possibility of a two-state solution by building settlements, by building the illegal wall on the West Bank, which cuts off the whole of Jerusalem from the West Bank. Israel, by its policy of creeping annexation and building the wall, has denied the possibility of a viable Palestinian state and a territorially contiguous Palestinian state. The reality today is that there is one regime from the river to the sea, and it's a Jewish supremacist regime, an ethnocracy in which one ethnic group dominates the other. There is another word for this phenomenon, and that's apartheid.
Two people, both highly educated, both on separate sides of this issue, understand this. The only solution here is a one-state solution with democratic rights for both. This is a great listen. I'm going to link to the full interview or the full discussion below. Again, credit to Matt Leck here for sharing it on Twitter. That's how I saw this. Really, really worth the watch. But it goes to show this, again, this is what Yara Jamal, the Palestinian-Canadian journalist, was arguing for. And she gets fired over this. Insane.